Hello friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And today I'm here to answer some more questions about vacuum sealing dry goods into jars. Even though I had a video that would have published about a month ago at the time you're seeing this video that was 24 minutes long, thinking I was answering all the questions on vacuum sealing, there was one important one I totally forgot, and then a bunch more that came in as a result. So I'm going to be covering those questions because they are the most asked questions I get. So let's get started with the first most asked question that I had meant to cover in that video, and that is, how long do dehydrated goods last on a shelf once they've been vacuum sealed? Well, in some cases it is going to depend on the items. But generally speaking, as long as your items are fully dried and well sealed and you don't lose the seal, they should last pretty much indefinitely. Now, obviously you're going to have to keep in mind, just like any home canned good, whether it be pressure canned or water bath canned, is the longer they sit in the jars and are exposed to light or heat, if you keep them in an area that gets too hot, that is going to degrade the nutrient value of the things that you have dried and vacuum sealed up over time. It doesn't mean they've gone bad. They're still going to retain their calories in them. You'll never lose your calories, but you can lose some of the important nutrients over time as it gets exposed to these things. So it's still recommended to try to work through them within the first year to couple years. But I've had goods vacuum sealed into jars for many years on the shelf and have had very little problems. Now, there are a few things that have gone rancid on me that I'll cover in a minute, because that's another question I get quite a bit. But first, let me cover a few of the other questions I get. Another question that people ask a lot is, do I use oxygen absorbers? No, I don't. That is completely optional if that is something you want to do. I have yet found a need to spend money on oxygen absorbers to use in my jars. If the jars are vacuum sealed, there's really no need for oxygen absorbers. Unless you're concerned about losing a seal, an oxygen absorber, if that seal gets lost, can then come into effect and possibly reseal that jar. But to me, it's a waste of money to buy oxygen absorbers to put in there, because in most cases, especially when you're talking about things like fully dried herbs or rhubarb that's fully dried, if this was to come unsealed, the worst thing that's going to happen to these is they're just going to go stale. It doesn't mean they're going to spoil. And a lot of times, stuff like a dehydrated rhubarb, I'm going to be cooking it anyway, so it's not going to be an issue. Or herbs are going to be going into teas, or they're going to be used to infuse oils such as dandelion, or used in homemade soaps. So any of this that's ever happened where I have lost seals and they got a little stale, it didn't matter for what I was using it in. But it is recommended that, and I don't always think to do this, to check your jars periodically. Like within a few days after vacuum sealing them, check them to see if they've lost their seal. If they have, that means you either didn't seal them good enough, like you didn't vacuum it down well enough, or there's some kind of imperfection in the lid or in the jar, such as the case of this rhubarb. The lid I had on here before, I just vacuum sealed it up a couple days ago, but I went and checked it and it had lost its seal, and I got to looking again at the lid, and it really wasn't a good lid for me to have reused for vacuum sealing. I always reuse lids. This was an older lid like this one, which I'm going to try this one, but I found that the older lids, that once you've canned with them, you know, this one's probably, I don't know, maybe 25 years old or so. They had a thicker gummy layer on it, and they're going to can really good for pressure canning and water bath canning. But I find that once you've done that once, it's not like the newer lids, that layer doesn't get as messed up and marred as it does on the older ones. So that possibly could be why they made the changes they did. But this one looks pretty good, so I'm going to give it a try on something today. So no, I personally do not use oxygen absorbers. It's really a matter of choice. If you feel the need to take that extra step, then just go ahead and do it. And another one I get frequently is, do I freeze my grains or my beans before vacuum sealing? Well, when it comes to my homegrown dried beans, that's the only thing I actually vacuum seal in jars as far as dried beans go, are the ones I grow myself. And no, I don't freeze them first. I just put them right in the jar, vacuum seal them up. I'm not worried about it, no problems. Even the beans I buy in bulk from other places, I have never frozen them. Now that again is a matter of choice, and it is recommended because I did have only one case in the many, many years I've been buying grains in bulk. Only once did it ever happen to me that I got a bag of grains, and it was spelt grains, that must have already had some weevil eggs in there, and then eventually they hatched. I always keep my grains and my beans that I buy in bulk like that in big buckets with Gamma Seal lids. A lot of times I'll put them in a Mylar bag, but in most cases I simply put them right into the bucket in the bag they came in and work through them like that, and almost never have any issues. One of the key things I do though is I always throw bay leaves in there as soon as I open it up. The bay leaves will keep weevils and other bugs from wanting to go into the grains. But I'm certain that that bag of spelt that I had was already infested when I got it. So nothing I did helped. Not putting diatomaceous earth in there, not putting the bay leaves in there. It was already too late because they were already infested. But since I had it in a bucket with a Gamma Seal lid, they didn't cross over and get into any of my other beans or grains. So it was really no issue. And here's something interesting, is that back before I did the buckets, I wasn't taking that great a care of storing my beans and grains and still never had issues with weevils. So it was really only that one time that I had that problem. Now, if you live in an area that's more prone to having weevils, I believe they tend to like drier climates better. I believe, because that was more an issue where I grew up in Eastern Washington, not here. Then that might be something you'll want to consider. Again, it's a matter of choice. For me, a lot of it was the pain of not having the freezer space to throw a big 50-pound bag, because I keep my freezers pretty full. And then I would believe after you take it out of the freezer, you would want them to come up to room temperature and make sure they're fully dry before you pack them away for long-term storage, because you don't want any moisture in there, and moisture in there can cause mold. And that's the number one reason why I don't do that, because I don't want to have to be concerned about how much moisture got in there in the process of freezing and then thawing them out again before I vacuum seal them up into jars or even seal up into Gamma Seal buckets. Now, another question that, even though I did cover this in this video, some people still missed it. No, you cannot vacuum seal liquids and then put them onto your shelf and expect them to last. Anything that is wet, you cannot do that with. They will spoil and they will mold. What you can do is you can vacuum seal your fresh produce, such as green beans and snow peas and rhubarb, which is what I do. Vacuum seal them into your pint jars, making sure there's plenty of airspace, and then freeze them. Or you fully dehydrate them and then vacuum seal them into jars and put on your shelf. You cannot vacuum seal fresh things into jars and then put them on a shelf and expect them not to spoil. The only way you can store liquids or fruits and vegetables that are not dehydrated on a shelf is to either water bath or pressure can them. They have to be canned. Now, when it comes to vacuum sealing liquids that you're going to freeze, I don't do that either. If I'm going to freeze a liquid into jars, I I leave about an inch or so of headspace. One of these aren't sealed, and I'll explain that in a minute. They're not sealed yet. I set the lid on there while it's freezing, and then after it's fully frozen, I then put the band on just to keep it from getting freezer burnt on the top. It's only that very top layer of your liquid that you would have to worry about anyway. The reason you don't want to vacuum seal liquid into jars when you freeze that is that liquid will expand and it will burst your jars. All right, another question I get a lot is, how long does it take to dehydrate this or that or something else? Well, it's going to depend on the item that you're drying. And I do not have a length of time set in my head for each one of these things. And the reason why is because I am always drying a bunch of different things at the same time. I only have one dehydrator running today, though usually in summertime I'm running 2 to 3 at a time, but only one today. And so how I've got it in there, I've got rhubarb at the top, I then have some orange peels, and then I have oregano, and then some calendula flowers, and I'll be adding some pansies in there in a little bit as well. So I put them in order because I have the heating element on the top because I have a Nesco. So I put them in order of the things that can dry at a higher heat on top so that I can safely set my heat at 115, knowing that by the time the heat gets down to the more delicate items, the herbs towards the bottom, it's going to have cooled down considerably to about 110, 105. So I put them in order like that. And so I don't keep track of how long it takes, but because each thing is going to be different anyway, it's a matter of checking those things. Things that dry quickly, like certain delicate herbs, should be checked every couple of hours. Some things like your produce, like your rhubarb, can take a full 24 hours to dry. Usually around 8 to 12 is going to be your normal time, but it's also going to depend on where you have your heat set, the type of dehydrator you're using, how you're using it, and how humid it is in your house. So because of all these things, I cannot give you exact times. What I can tell you is make sure you check them every couple hours to see how dry they're getting. Now me, because I run my dehydrator on solar power, I never let it run during the night. And it's probably a good idea anyway, even if you're using public power, to not let it run during the night. So if the things are not fully dried by the time I go to unplug it in the evening, then I simply plug it back in the morning, let it finish drying, check it during the day, and start dealing with it right away. So again, that's something I can't answer for each specific thing for each specific person because it's going to be different depending on your conditions, dehydrator, heat settings, and what you're drying. I talked in that one video that if I haven't said it yet, I'll go ahead and make sure I link it down below about, just the various aspects of vacuum sealing into jars. And I did talk about when it comes to the food saver top, how this little gasket comes out almost every time you use it, but it slips back in easily enough. But something I didn't think about at the time that people were talking about having an issue with the regular mouth sealer is every time they seal with it, they go to pull it off, it pulls the lid off with it. And I couldn't figure out right away what the problem was. And then it dawned on me as I saw more and more people talking about that they were using the actual food saver machine to vacuum seal. When I haven't used that to vacuum seal in jars in like 4 years. Once I discovered the brake bleeder method, that's all I ever use. I stopped using my food saver to vacuum seal in jars because it's lame. And I just don't use food saver at all anymore. And I gave up on them. But when I switched to the brake bleeder to vacuum seal, I never had any more problems again using the regular mouth. Never lost the seal unless there was something wrong with the jar or the lid itself. If that happened, then that's where the problem was. So really the problem has to do with the food saver machine. I recommend getting yourself a brake bleeder. It's much cheaper than a food saver. I now have 2 of them because I have a backup to this 4-year-old one that I've been using a lot. You're gonna pay anywhere from 1/3 to 1/5 the price of what you would pay for a food saver. Now, let me talk about another thing that I get questioned about a lot, and that is about vacuum sealing nuts into jars. Right here I have a jar of almonds, and here is a jar of pecans. These ones are from last summer, and I haven't opened them yet to test them, but I'm positive they're still good, and I shall do that right now. Oh, another question is, how do you open your jars? Normally I use a bottle opener. I'm very careful with it, but since I didn't bring the bottle opener in here with me, a lot of times I can open this with my fingernails, so we'll try that. There we go. So I'm testing these to see if they're still good. They smell good, and yep, they taste just as good as the day I vacuum sealed them into the jar almost a year ago now. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna reseal this jar. And notice this was a regular mouse sealed with a brake bleeder, and it didn't lose its seal. And I'll show you right here that yes, I can pull this top off without unsealing the jar itself, or pulling the lid off. The worst that happens is that sometimes this comes out, which it didn't this time, and there we go. It's sealed right back up again. This is another great thing about vacuum sealing things. You can open it up, take stuff out, vacuum seal it again, even if it's only partially full like this is here. So almonds, never had a problem with these. Now I didn't bring one of these jars out, but I have jars of sliced almonds that I've had vacuum sealed into jars for like 3 or 4 years, still good as the day I put them in. So it's not entirely true that you can't do this with nuts. It depends on the nuts though. So some nuts tend to be fattier than others. Now, when it comes to Brazil nuts, I found that does not work well. However, I will still vacuum seal them into jars like this, but then I will freeze them. So macadamia nuts, I haven't tried vacuum sealing them, leaving them for long periods of time to test. I might try that with a small amount, but I see macadamia nuts as very similar to Brazil nuts. So what I have a new package here. I get these ones here from Costco. Pretty good price on them, getting them from Costco online. And so I'm just gonna go ahead and pour these into a jar. I mean, you can throw the bag into the freezer if you want, but if you are trying to get away from the plastics that it came in, you can just go ahead and put it into a jar right away. And then I recommend, just to help prevent any kind of freezer burn, going ahead and vacuum sealing it. Though honestly, even the things that I've frozen in jars that I did not vacuum seal, I still never had an issue with freezer burn on them. But then again, I'm usually working through them within the year. So, looks like it's sealed well. Then I'm gonna go ahead and put the band on there just as a safety measure, just in case it comes unsealed. And that should keep them fresh and they're not gonna spoil. So the nuts in particular are very, very high in fat. I do recommend freezing those, but all nuts are fatty. And like I said, never had any issues with the almonds, be they whole or sliced, or the pecans, just the Brazil nuts. I also have hazelnuts in jars that I've been working through. I haven't had them in there for a really long time yet. So far I haven't come across any bad ones, and I've worked through a couple of jars. Okay, and then one more thing I wanted to talk about before I close this up, and this is why I brought these out. Partly because, I mean, I have tons of stuff, dried things, stored in jars. My pantry is just full of them, but these are things right here, these 3 jars that are sitting close because I have my dehydrator running out there, and what I'm doing is I'm currently filling these up. Once they are full, I then vacuum seal them and put them in storage. But I don't worry about vacuum sealing them until I have them totally full, because it usually doesn't take me long. So then once I do, I just vacuum seal it, and then it goes into storage, and it's all good. But again, because these are herbs and the way they're used, like here I've got mint. I think this is my 3rd jar for this year that I've dehydrated up. And I still have a jar or 2 from last year to work through. We go through a lot of mint during the year making teas. Every night I make an herbal tea, and most of the time it is peppermint tea. Sometimes I'll throw a few other herbs in there. And then this one here is valerian leaves and flowers. And I'm going to be, I'm almost done filling this one up, so I'll also be vacuum sealing it and putting it into my storage. And I just remembered one more question, and that is, people will come in and say, can I dehydrate this? Can I dehydrate that? Can I dehydrate something else? I'm just gonna say yes, because Pretty much anything you can think of, you can dehydrate. Now, as far as I know, the only thing that really needs to be blanched before you dehydrate it is potatoes, because potatoes will turn black, any part of them that's not cooked, if you try to dehydrate them raw. Everything else, regardless of what it says, beans, snow peas, rhubarb, I find it best to just put them on there raw. I never blanch. I did try blanching snow peas one time before freezing. Never did it again. They freeze better straight off the vine. I tried blanching rhubarb before dehydrating it. It was terrible and messy, and I never did it again. And just cutting it up raw, putting it on there fresh, and dehydrating it is the cleanest, easiest, quickest way to dehydrate rhubarb, and it cooks up just fine without blanching. So that, I hope I covered two questions there at the same time. No, you don't need to blanch everything. And can you dehydrate it? The basic answer is yes. And here's the deal, if you're not sure, try with just a small amount. This is how I've done everything. I didn't go look up, can I dehydrate it? I just tried it to see how it would turn out, and have been happy with the results almost every time. I do know watermelon just pretty much turns to like a fruit leather, but yes, you can dehydrate it. So, and instead of worrying about whether you can or not, just try it and then see how it turns out. If it's good and you like it, then you can do a bunch more, vacuum seal it into your jars for long-term storage. Just make sure your items are fully dried when you do that. Okay, well, I hope I actually answered all the questions this time. And don't forget to refer back to some of my other videos and be watching for more. Oh yes, and I almost forgot to say this. I did just put a video out, or at least by the time you're seeing it, it would have just published, on how I use some of the various freeze-dried and dehydrated foods for all kinds of different things, from cooking meals to making treats and so on. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this video and you learned something new. Thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.